Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 56 of the Law Ninja Choke MMA Picks podcast. Today, I'm joined by Will in the UK and Josh in Australia. I'm Dom, I'm based in the US, and today we're breaking down UFC 327, taking place in Miami, headlined by Jiri Prochazka and Carlos Ulberg for the World Light Heavyweight Championship. Super exciting card. Top to bottom, great fights. These are the ones we're going to be focusing on. Outside of these fights, guys, anything that you're looking forward to? Because there are some bangers here.
No, all of these fights deserve their own due respect. They're so high level across the board, and I mean I know that some names are iffy here and there. Like no one really cares too much about Radke and Prado, but still, it's a banger of a fight. Pitbull versus Pico is like a Bellator PFL clash, right? So I'm keen to see that. Other than that, all of the fights are going to be insane to watch. So I'm happy for once.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think not only are they going to be exciting to watch, from a betting perspective, it's also a very unique card too, because I don't think I've ever seen an entire slate so hard to predict from like an odds making perspective. I mean, I think you've got like one fighter in the minus 300s in Pico, and then there might be one or two guys with minus 200. I think Radke might be, but other than that, like every fight is within like a evens to minus 199 range, which is very rare. I was saying to Josh before we went on air that honestly, getting a 50% prediction accuracy for this card is actually relatively impressive. Whereas usually, there's like some minus 500 sprinkled in there to really pad that record. So yeah, I think it's going to be chaotic for a lot of people in terms of actually like figuring out who's going to win a lot of these, because they're both unique stylistically and sort of contextually. There's just lots of talking points across the entire card.
Yeah, great matchmaking. I'm really looking forward to this. We've had like a string of sort of average or subpar events, so this one's cracking. And yeah, I've spent the last 6 days on a road trip, so I did nothing but listen to podcasts and YouTube channels talking about this card, and just wanted to say that I couldn't find a single channel that had anything positive to say about Francisco Prado. I just thought to myself, I'll listen to this episode of a random YouTuber talking about the card if they can say something positive, at least about Prado. But no, every single person talking about Prado just says the same thing, which you guys will probably already know. He's undersized for the division. Like everyone said that, and he's 1-4, so I can't pick him. So my plea to all YouTubers who aren't watching this anyway or listening to this is just pick Prado. It's like a closely lined fight, as Will just said. Like he has a chance to win, just find something positive to say about him. I just feel sorry for the guy. He's 23. He's got a brick for a head. Radke's been knocked out and finished before. Anything's possible in this sport, so you don't have anything to lose. And that's where I'll end on the Prado rant. And I hand over to Josh.
Yeah, this fight's been on my radar for so long. I mean, well, really, ever since the fight's been announced. But like, I have been critical of both fighters, so I'm going to be a little bit harsh, mostly on Prochazka here, because I did pick Ulberg at the end. But anyway, Prochazka, he is a fairly dynamic fighter, but he is also both unpredictable and predictable. What I mean by that is that he tends to throw a lot of variety into his attacks, but he also loads up a lot beforehand. Like we see him sometimes bounce on the feet before he throws something, or sometimes like becomes all stoic and very still before he throws something. So he's very predictable, but he's also just a wild card. He's going to catch Ulberg off guard here and there, but I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. I do expect Prochazka to be the more aggressive, marching forward kind of fighter here. Ulberg utilizes a lot of footwork when he fights. He needs to typically stay at that jab or teep range to succeed. And really, the only way Prochazka can get around that is to just pressure Ulberg against the cage and hopefully minimize that gap in between both fighters. But the one thing that really stood out to me when I did tape on Prochazka for the 20th time because he fights so much, is that he utilizes artificial defense. And what I mean by that is like he uses a lot of head movement, a lot of feints, a lot of like pseudo raised guard kind of thingamajiggies. You know, like he's a very weird fighter overall, and they may look defensive, but when he gets hit, clearly there is no defense there. Like he only moves his head to look differently to his opponent, or like make his opponent hard to, or sorry, to pretty much look differently, right? Like I mean, it's hard for his opponent to know what he's going to throw when Prochazka is moving so haphazardly. I don't know how that's going to mix into this fight this weekend. It's a Prochazka fight, so really anything can happen. Although according to a reader of mine, he commented on my write-up last night, I believe, and he said that Prochazka is training out of Mexico. And that kind of intrigues me because Mexico is a very high altitude place, right? We know that all of the great cardio fighters out there do train at altitude and it helps them out. But like, I don't think altitude or cardio, sorry, is an issue for Prochazka. He can do fine in 25 rounds before his supposed trip to Mexico. So I question why he's there in the first place. If he is there in the first place, maybe Dom or Will can correct me, maybe. But either way, I don't think cardio is his issue. I think his issue is just being a good fighter. I don't think Prochazka is a good fighter at all. Most of Prochazka's like highlight reels are very good for the social media world and for YouTube and whatever. And it tends to attract a lot of like dumb people into thinking that he's very good. But when you watch his full fights, in between his highlights, he's like an average fighter, right? He just stands there, gets hit, says, "Come on," and you know, he gets back into getting hit again. And then he does some amazing shit, and then people are like, "Wow, he's amazing. He's like a champion. Wow, holy shit." I don't fall for that. I kind of look past that. But if there is one thing that I do expect Prochazka to eat, apart from food after the fight and before the fight, is leg kicks. Ulberg is very good at throwing out those leg kicks, and historically Prochazka has had trouble with the leg kicks before. Like, I mean, we saw Roundtree Jr. pretty much dismantle the legs of Prochazka to varying degrees of success, but it still is a highly vulnerable strike for Prochazka. Now, to kind of talk more about Ulberg here, because I did just talk negatively about Prochazka for the past however minutes. Expect more strategic striking from Ulberg, right? He's a very formulaic striker. He likes to stick to the basics, you know, pull counters, 1-2s down the pipeline. He likes to throw the very basic things in a very masterful way. But as I said, the main thing you got to look out for with Ulberg is his leg kicks. Like, if he wants to be mobile in this fight, and he will be, he is going to have to attack the legs of Prochazka and slow down that forward aggression from Prochazka. So I do expect Prochazka to march forward, but I also expect him to eat a lot of leg kicks whilst Ulberg kicks and moves. And given that the cage size is normal sized, I always talk about the cage size. It's only going to give Ulberg more real estate to move around and do his thing. When it comes to Ulberg's movement, though, at 5 rounds, I do have a bit of a, you know, alarm bell ring in my head about that, because Ulberg's cardio, whilst sometimes good, it can also be pretty bad at times, depending on how much pressure he has to handle. So early on in this fight, I do expect Prochazka to land his best shots. Oh, sorry, the opposite of that. I expect Ulberg to land his best shots, because that would make the most sense here. Ulberg is going to be the fastest striker. He is going to blitz through Prochazka's guard, his defenses, whatever, early on. the first 2 rounds are likely to be very Ulberg heavy in terms of output. But then the 3rd round happens, and we might see a downturn because obviously, being a lateral movement fighter, you got to have cardio, and I don't think Ulberg has that cardio to continuously move around the cage for 20 plus minutes. So the 3rd round is where the momentum is going to shift. So the first 2 rounds, Ulberg is going to look good. The 3rd round hits, things might get a bit chaotic. And then after the 3rd round, after that potential chaotic 3rd round, I do expect Prochazka to pull ahead. So Prochazka's chances of winning is not in the first 2 rounds, but it's in the last 3 rounds. I expect that championship mentality, or not mentality, experience in those 3 rounds to showcase themselves, really. So if we go down to my bets and whatever I placed and all that stuff, I do have Ulberg as a combo round KO thingamajiggy in the first 3 rounds. And then on the opposite end, I got Prochazka winning potentially in those last 3 rounds. So this is going to be a chaotic fight. I don't like predicting chaotic fights, but I also have been a huge fan of Ulberg, and his winning streak has been pretty crazy. So I'm siding with him here, and hopefully he brings the belt back to New Zealand. Any takers? Who wants to go first or second?
After you, Will.
I mean, I can wrap it up short and sweet on my end. I am somebody who likes to avoid high variance and put my money in spots that I feel confident on my read. And Jiri Prochazka is like a fighter designed to stop that from happening. I'm not sure I've ever confidently bet on a Prochazka fight apart from when it was Pereira that he was fighting, and I was betting on Pereira. I think Ulberg himself referred to this fight as chaos versus order, and that sums it up perfectly. It's nice to know that he understands that's what's happening. Prochazka, I don't think he's a bad fighter. I'm not gonna dunk on him in the same way Josh has, but like I hear what Josh is saying. It's not great until suddenly it's amazing, right? And that's just something you can't trust, in my opinion. I feel uncomfortable with the idea of putting money on Prochazka, regardless of his price tag. Well, unless he's like, massive underdog, but that's not the case here. Whereas Ulberg, it's funny, actually, honestly, it's the complete opposite in that he's respectable minute by minute, but at no point have I ever really gone, oh, wow, like that guy's a problem, So I think I'm just underwhelmed on either side in that you've got all the flash and no flash, but I don't know which one's superior. So the fact that the fight's lined quite close does my job for me. I honestly, like at the start of, not even this week, like weeks ago when I knew this fight was happening, I looked at the betting odds, saw it was a pick'em, thought, yep, sounds about right. And that's all I've thought about. So, I would say buyer beware here, because I just think you've got two really strong 50-50 arguments. I just can't really imagine anyone being very confident on the money line here. I mean, there are many ways to skin a cat, as they say. God knows why they say that, by the way. But anyway, prop wise, you could probably find yourself an angle, as you can see on screen here. Josh is sort of diving into the specifics of rounds and methods, but money line, I just don't know why someone would be super enthusiastic about this one. So that's all I have to say. Dom, take us away.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm mainly agreeing because of recent developments, actually. So there's been some photos coming out of Ulberg looking less than in shape, which I think is unusual, because I think most of us have seen a few of his fights, and he's like the Adonis, right? He looks great. He's got abs, he's ripped, and he just has a high percentage body fat. And I don't really know what to make of that, because I've never seen him look out of shape, and he's coming in here for a 5-round fight. So that kind of threw me off kilter, because I had a kind of theory that goes against what you said, Will, which speaks to what Josh said, which is Jiri's so hittable. I know you've bet, like I know you guys bet on what's his face, Khalil Roundtree, and he was winning that fight for 2 rounds, and then Jiri did the Jiri thing and came back. But I do think that's slightly different, because Khalil has shown that ability to be broken. And I know a lot of people have said, yes, Carlos Ulberg lost that fight against Kennedy. And I can't pronounce his surname. Kennedy. I'm just calling him Kennedy. He lost the fight against Kennedy. It was his debut, right? And I think, like, I just don't think it's so relevant. Like, he's had 9 fights since then, and they've all gone very well, and he hasn't had that issue. And, you know, on your debut, when you throw the kitchen sink at someone, you gas, like, guys, just chill out. Like, you know, it doesn't mean he can be broken. So I was very pro Ulberg in this spot, thinking, and, you know, the line has indicated that people do agree, like, when you can hit someone this easily. And you know, I've just actually trying to find out more about this body fat percentage increase on the Ulberg side as you were speaking, Josh. And yeah, I mean, there's not a lot out there, except, you know, people theorizing that maybe he's just going to look to knock Prochazka out early, basically, because, you know, he's an accurate puncher. So it does stand to reason then that your bets on the right do make a lot of sense. And this theory, which I was lamenting because I've seen it out there in the wild, you know, as a hammer, I was saying this is not like fiscally responsible to hammer this, you know, like certainly to place these bets can be a good idea, but not to, you know, put a lot of money on them, you know. I wouldn't advocate for that. But now it seems that if Ulberg is not in peak condition, because he's never like sprightly in the 3rd round anyway, so he's for sure going to be gassed in round 4 or 5, weighing more. I mean, I can't see how he can fight into rounds 4 and 5 against Jiri. So I do think this is actually perfect now, this we've got on screen. I really feel strongly, and I would lean towards the right hand side. I think Ulberg is going to knock out Jiri if this gained mass is purposeful and not just an injury. So the flip side of that is actually he could just be injured. Someone said he had a chronic knee injury and that he hasn't been able to train in the past, not in this specific camp, but in the past he has had a knee injury that's prevented him from training. It was Eugene Behrman who said that about Ulberg, like he wasn't able to train for this fight or something. In which case, yeah, I mean, that would probably bring Jiri much closer to like a round 3 finish, I'd say, rather than a 4 or 5. I don't think we're going to go much past that because I expect Ulberg to just gas out. So yeah, that's literally off the top of my head because I had this sort of perfect theory. I was going to play the Ulberg money line, and I thought that was the value side, and to play the long props on Jiri, like, you know, as kind of protection, because the round 3, 4, 5 is nicely priced. But just throw all that out the window and just completely agree with Willem. At the end of the day, I think now this is back in the high volatility zone, buyer beware, and I will look to cash out of the bets that I can. Certainly don't want anything to do with the Ulberg money line now that we have the sort of the chubby version. I don't want to be cruel to him. Maybe it's purposeful, like I said, and maybe he's going to talk about it at the press conference, but we'll find out. Should we move on?
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, so the co-main event, and obviously this is, you know, wasn't originally the co-main event because we had Tyra and Van, which is on the card. But I think this is still a great co-main, and I think the card is still great, top-notch, even without Tyra and Van, who are going to fight at a later date. We have the undefeated Russian Azamat Murzakanov, who is primarily a striker or a master of sambo, master of combat, so he can grapple as well. And we have Paulo Costa, Borohinia, Secret Juice Master on the right, moving up to light heavyweights, this light heavyweight bout. And yeah, I think it's really super interesting because I looked at my history with Murzakanov because I was thinking I usually got a pretty good read on him. So I looked at my record and I've bet on him 13 times, 12 of which have hit. That sounds really good, but it's not that good because it's pretty like pretty obvious how my bets have gone. I've had a lot of money line bets. That it does include some props. So I had the KO on Rakic, and the only bet that I've ever missed on Murzakanov was actually taking round 3 in his last fight. Every other bet I've hit, and basically a bunch of money lines and scorecards, no action bets. So nothing like high risk really. Probably most of them at chalk. All this to say that I will be leaning on the Costa side, and this is more of a numbers play. And I do think that Costa looked fantastic in his last fight. So I rewatched the Kopylov fight, and Kopylov is a really good fighter, someone I think is really, you know, really decent at middleweight. And he's fast, he's rangy, he was taller and bigger than Paulo Costa, which isn't relevant here because I think size-wise, I think these guys will be similar. I mean, you can see actually on screen, Paulo Costa is the taller fighter with tiny reach advantage. It's basically going to look very, very similar in height and reach. And style-wise, I think they're not that dissimilar in terms of the fact they're both strikers. They both like to bounce quite a lot. Murzakanov is bouncy, Costa is bouncy. They're both in and out quickly. I don't think like Murzakanov is going to have his traditional speed advantage. For sure, he's going to have the power advantage, but he's not going to have the speed advantage. Is he more diverse a striker than Paulo Costa? For sure. He's also fighting, I believe, out of the southpaw stance, so there's that aspect to be aware of. But Paulo Costa's last performance showed that he can still produce, because his previous performances before that against Sean Strickland, he's looked just off color. He's looked, poor basically. But this version, this sort of like motivated version against Kopylov, I think if we get that version, this is going to be a competitive fight, a very close fight, and one which probably Murzakanov has certain advantages, mainly through the power. So certainly if he catches Costa early, he can hurt him. I think Costa's never really been hurt that badly that I can remember. I think the only time I remember seeing Costa hurt is against Yoel Romero, and that was like a fight which he won. Absolutely amazing middleweight fight. He got hurt early and then he rocked Yoel Romero. It was sloppy, it was all over the place, but Costa's tightened up his game. He's going to be in and out of the pocket really quick. His kicks are really fast, and I think in many ways these guys match up really closely. So I don't think there's a lot of value in taking Murzakanov at -200 or whatever he's sitting at the moment. And if I was going to bet on this, which I am, I think there's value on the money line. A conservative way to play this would be the Costa just has to win one round. And I think if you believe it's going to be a close fight, you may as well hold something on the fight goes to split decision. So yeah, that's my take on the co-main, and would love to hear what you guys think. Maybe go to Josh first, because I know you're on the other side of this.
Yeah, I am. I feel like Costa moving up to 205 is a bit like sacrificial to what makes him great. I mean, he is a phenomenal 185er in terms of physique and power and speed and explosiveness and whatever. But when you're moving up 20 pounds, I feel like there has to be some questions about how you're moving up, right? Is Costa putting on more muscle mass? And if so, is he going to cut to 205 okay? Is he going to be more fatigued when he strikes? Is he going to be slower, more clumsier when he strikes because of all that additional muscle mass? I am mostly intrigued by how Costa is going to move up in weight. I mean, people speculate that it's just simply him not having to cut to 185 anymore. And I'm like, sure, but in that case, you're still facing fighters who cut down from 230, 240 back down to 205 or whatever, right? Like you're still facing heavy hitters. And in this particular case, I do think Murzakanov is going to outstrike Costa. We have seen Costa being outstruck before. I believe when he fought, what's that Russian dude's name that he just won against? Someone help me out here.
You mean Kopylov?
Kopylov, yes. Sorry, I was thinking of like Hooper or something, like because of the same hairstyle. I mean, anyway, when he fought Kopylov in that third round, despite Costa being the winner, Kopylov was still landing shots. And every time Kopylov landed those shots, Costa was like, "Yeah, come on, bring more, fight more." If Costa brings that war attitude to Murzakanov, that's going to be a terrible night for him, I reckon, because Murzakanov hits like a truck. He hits like a very skinny heavyweight in a sense, right? He brings that power from that weight into the 205 division, and that's a pretty dangerous thing to deal with. And Costa traditionally doesn't have the striking defense or the striking wherewithal to avoid those shots. Sure, there's a raised guard, but what use is a raised guard if your opponent can fucking find their punches through it, right? It's like closing the door, but the door is halfway broken. Anyway, it's like, come on. I mean, look, I respect Dom's pick here. I'm not going to be a prick. I like the plus 3.5 points spread. That's something I do see hitting, but I have also been hypercritical of Costa here. I don't know why he's moving up to 205. Maybe he's just ingested too much secret juice and he can't cut down to 185 anymore. Who the fuck knows? But I also think that Murzakanov is the perfect 205er when it comes to power, speed, technical striking, and the experience, really. So I think if Costa engages with Murzakanov on the feet, Mirzakanov's going to have the upper hand here. Costa's grappling on wrestling is mildly okay, so maybe he can rely on that. But still, I think Murzakanov is going to be a bit too much when it comes to power. As soon as Costa feels the power, he's going to, shell up and cry about it. Maybe, I don't know. So that's my little rant and breakdown. How about you, Will?
Yeah. I mean, the most important thing for me here is the betting line. Paulo Costa is around plus 175, and I think that he is going to offer all of the skills and strengths that usually makes the question marks surrounding Murzakanov come to light. Just sort of combing through Murzakanov's record. I don't know about you guys, but if you've been watching the UFC long enough throughout his whole UFC career, Murzakanov, which isn't that long, I think it was 2022 he made his debut. It's hard to forget when someone has a very underwhelming performance. And Murzakanov was 2 rounds down to Tafon Chukwi in his debut before he pulled a very nice knee out of nowhere in the 3rd round. And I think I bet on Murzakanov on Contender Series and was like, wow, yeah, this guy's getting hyped and he looks the part. And, he's an undefeated Russian, heavy hands, etc., etc. But then to sort of see him come in and be so underwhelming, it really did leave a sort of like dubious doubt. And I think I've never been able to shake it with Murzakanov. I've just never trusted him because I've always felt like he's capable of showing the same guy that lost 2 rounds to Nchukwi. But then I sort of realized that the reason for that is that he's just become much more of he's shown much more of a dangerous finishing ability. He beat the shit out of Devin Clark in his next one. Jesus Christ, that was a beatdown. Dustin Jacoby to win a decision over him is respectable, I think. It was a close fight, to be fair. He knocked him down as well. And then finishing Menefield, Ribeiro, and then Rakic in pretty quick succession is very impressive. But, the Rakic fight was, I believe, lined very closely, and people were very back and forth on, can Rakic have success in the longer minutes here? Because Murzakanov is not a great minute winner, I don't think. When I watch him, apart from that Devin Clark fight, when I watch him sort of, minute by minute, I'm never super convinced that he is ultra dominant and the much better martial artist here. And I think I can't really remember, but I've looked through the scorecards of all of the fights that had completed rounds, and he's not winning them all dominantly. He's not winning all 3 judges' scorecards and all 3 rounds every single time. So Paulo Costa, the one thing he does bring for the most part is durability. I know we talked about the fact that he did get hurt in a couple of fights, also obviously got finished by Izzy, but I still do trust him, and I trust his style as well, because he obviously brings respect out of opponents, because he himself is a very physically imposing man and at least used to hit very hard. So I'm not convinced in thinking, Murzakanov will get another finish here. So then it becomes a conversation about how does Murzakanov handle a minute by minute. And I've already said I don't think that's his best skill set, and I don't think that's where he looks at his best. So, whilst Costa himself is not the most trustworthy guy, I do think when he's on, he's very good. And he's gone from overrated to underrated in the years since that title shot. And I know he's changed a lot, and he's really been sort of on a decline of sorts. But like Dom said, that Kopylov performance really did highlight that the Costa that fought for a title or, got to a title shot is still in there. And if he's able to move past this very weird chapter where there were a lot of question marks. I mean, obviously there's the joke about him drinking wine the night of the fight against Izzy, and maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't, but his attitude, he went from a Terminator to a meme, and I feel like he's calmed down a little bit on the latter, and he seems to be a little bit more locked in and dialed in. And if you're capable of beating Roman Kopylov over a 15-minute striking affair, I think you are dialed in. So yeah, in short, I think that with Murzakanov's quick finishing ability possibly not in play here, the door is wide open for Paulo Costa to pull off a big upset if he wants it. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but I would call it a coin flip if they fight for 15 minutes personally. And as I said at the start, Costa is around plus 175. So by my calculations, Costa is a value play, but just not a confident one. So yeah, I also am on the Costa side. I wouldn't want to bet on Murzakanov at minus money, basically. So yeah, an intriguing one. I really hope Costa can continue to show that talented level that he has had in the past, but I guess we will see.
Yeah, some great thoughts from both of you. I just thought I'd mention or respond to Josh querying the move up, and yeah, I do think that was intriguing at first. But I mean, that Costa has had problems making middleweight. He's missed weight numerous times, had numerous cancelled bouts, so he's obviously on the bigger side for middleweight. And probably when you looked at the opponent, you thought, well, this guy's on the smaller side for light heavy. So that probably part of the logic, I imagine, is that it's the opponent as well, because obviously, like Will just said, if he beats Murzakanov, I mean, he can pretty much take a run at the title at light heavyweight. Not that that would necessarily be a good idea, but he's probably looked at the middleweight and thought, well, I don't want to refight Chimaev necessarily. So it could be smart. I think Costa's pretty smart at this point in his career. He probably knows he hasn't got that many fights left, because he's older than I thought he was. I believe he's 35. He's still young. He's still the younger man in this bout as well. That's worth something I didn't mention. Sorry, he's 34 and Murzakanov is 36. So yeah, I think that was interesting. And I thought that Will's point about the record of Murzakanov, it does hold true. I think he's got all this hype and he's got this line because he's knocking so many people out. But the fight away is not like the Dustin Jacoby one. Fairly close, and Jacoby managed to win the third round, right? If that was the case here, then Costa plus 3.5 points would hit, for instance. I'm willing to discount certain fights for both fighters. So on the Murzakanov side, I'm more than happy to discount the Tafon and Chukwi fight, because he came out after that and said he had a terrible camp. And it's 2022, so it's pre PEDs. He's been caught twice taking PEDs, so he's probably back on them now. Pretty sure he is, because he seems to be doing really well. And he knocked out Rakic with a power jab in his last fight, right? So I mean, I don't know, like he's not going to knock out Paulo Costa with that punch. So before that, in that match, Rakic was winning. Basically, he was having the better moments. He was really hitting Murzakanov clean with the body kick, and it was unfortunate that it ended so quickly, because it would have been interesting to see a bit more of that. And yeah, on the Costa side, he basically hasn't hardly fought recently. So he's just fought Kopylov, and then before that he hadn't fought for a year. He fought in 2024 against Strickland. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating fight, and I think it's closer than the line, as Will said.
All right. Speaking of close lines, we have another main card bout between Cub Swanson and Nate Landwehr. A fight between veterans, pretty much at this stage. Both guys have been plying their trade as brawlers and fan favorites for many, many years. Swanson inside the UFC for most of it. Landwehr, more of a newer addition, but he's been all over the world doing his thing. Nate the Train is a meme that we know and love. He's a crazy motherfucker, says a bunch of crazy stuff, likes to sort of march his opponents down, and seems to enjoy taking damage to a certain extent. Cub Swanson, a bit less of a character inside the cage, but a guy who has put on some crazy brawls and some real amazing highlights. They have a common opponent in Doo Ho Choi. Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi is a great fight. If you've not seen that, definitely check that one out. Anyway, as I say, a close fight. When this one opened, I believe the early sort of price tag that we settled at was Cub Swanson at around the plus 130 mark. Now, the odds have shifted a little bit in that money has consistently come in on Swanson, and I haven't checked this morning, but about 12 hours ago, Cub Swanson officially moved into favorite status on BetOnline, which is quite significant movement, I would say. Significant enough to pay attention to it. That would imply that a lot of people see value in the once underdog, now favorite. And you can kind of see why, I mean, obviously they've both had very long careers and, very detailed careers that I suppose you should probably zoom in and look at the more recent sort of performances. Cub Swanson, does he look 42 years old? I should also mention, obviously, Cub Swanson, 42 years old. Massive red flag, that number. Obviously, can't really deny that. But does he look it? That's the most important thing. In his last fight, he beat Billy Quarantillo via finish in round 3. That's a very impressive thing to have on your record. I mean, Billy Q is one of those guys who weaponizes cardio, who really like puts it on late. So to finish him in round 3, I think it was either 1-1 or Swanson was 2-0 up on the scorecard. So he wasn't being beaten along the way. It wasn't an upset out of nowhere. Then he lost a split decision to Andre Fili. Again, Fili a little bit past his prime, but a competent guy minute to minute. I think he's it's a respectable performance for a 40-something-year-old. And then before that, he beat Hakeem Dawodu by decision. Again, Dawodu no longer in the UFC, never really did anything super impressive, but you watch that guy, he's an impressive striker. He's not bad. So I'm very impressed by that string of 3 performances. I think I'm impressed regardless of his age. I think that's a good showing. It's a UFC level showing. I would not be shitting on Cub Swanson for that result. But the fact that he would have been in his 40s when they all happened, that's very good. So I personally am willing, very surprisingly willing, to ignore the fact that Swanson is 42 years old. I respect the fact that it is a big asterisk, and he could just show up here and look like shit, and he could show up here and look like his cardio can't hold up for 15 minutes. That's going to happen at some point. Time is undefeated, but like, you kind of have to have an element of seeing it in the tape. And I don't personally think I saw much or anything that really demonstrates that 42 years has to be the highlight of this fight. On the flip side, Nate Landwehr he's only 37 years old. That's still also a little bit on the old side. But Landwehr's, he's probably a bit older in fighter years when you look at the way that the guy fights. He's had the worst performances recently. He's been KO'd in his last 2 in a row. Morgan Charrier got him in round 3. Again, that's not I don't blame him for that. Charrier is a good fighter, despite the fact that he's not quite presented himself in the level that some of us may have thought when he got to the UFC. But he's a very respectable fighter. And before that, he got KO'd by Doo-Ho Choi, having unanimously lost rounds 1 and 2. I mentioned Doo-Ho Choi earlier. One of my favorite fighters, by the way, probably a bit of a niche reference. I'm really disappointed that military service really got in the way of that guy's career. But to lose 2 rounds to Doo-Ho Choi and then get finished in the 3rd is pretty sloppy and like underwhelming. I mean, I can think of a lot of fighters that hasn't happened to, Cub Swanson being one of them. And guys like Kyle Nelson. Kyle Nelson went to a draw with Doo-Ho Choi, I think. So kind of concerning from like an overall like minute winning and like result perspective. So in terms of how they actually stylistically match up against each other, I think that Swanson still has the edge in durability and also possibly minute winning as well. Yes, Swanson's been finished twice, but they were due to a body kick from Giga Chikadze, something that, that is one of the most lethal single strikes in the division. And also a body kick is sometimes a non-negotiable. It's not necessarily about durability. If your body shuts down because you've been hit in the liver, sorry, bro, it's over. And also lost his via leg kicks to Jonathan Martinez, I think it was. Like, again, leg kicks, it's a tricky one, like sometimes you can eat 100 of them. Sometimes one good one can change the course of the fight. And, Swanson probably should have checked them a bit better, but I don't. Conversations about durability, especially regarding his age, I don't think that leg kicks is particularly like relevant to that conversation. Whereas, Nate Landwehr, the losses to Charrier and Doo-Ho Choi were much more legitimate. They were due to punches. So I do have more doubt on the side of Landwehr's durability than Swanson's. In terms of dangerousness, it's the other way around, though. I think Nate the Train is much more dangerous than Cub Swanson, but Swanson still has the ability to sort of keep it moving for 15 minutes and keep Landwehr honest and stop him from putting too much pressure on the gas, because Swanson does still have a bit of pop to his punches. And in terms of the statistics, because I do expect this one to be a sort of 15-minute kickboxing striking affair, Swanson has better significant strike accuracy and defense. And these two have had long and storied careers now, to the point where there's a lot of data involved in those percentages. So they're not like asterisked or skewed. And I think it's quite fair to say that should be the case still here. As long as Swanson is moving and operating as he should be, as he's shown throughout his career, and even in these later years in his career, he still is the more higher functioning striker. I think he should also be the cleaner one. It just depends on whether or not he allows Landwehr to get overly aggressive and land some big stuff. They are in the bigger cage, so I think there's also the chance that Swanson can sort of do that stick and move game plan. And yeah, I do expect this one to be a competitive and very high volume affair, but I just think that you should expect Swanson to come away with it more often than not. Something I wrote in my notes here: if these were both 29-year-old guys and didn't have, you know, like durability concerns, what would the line be? I think Cub Swanson would be a not much bigger, but a bigger favorite, a more significant one, around like the -175 to -200 range. So really, I think the conversation all just comes around the age. It's all about whether or not you think Cub Swanson can, you know, turn back the clock, I suppose, or if whether or not he will succumb to Father Time. So at +130, I thought the juice was worth a squeeze. So I did bet Swanson at +130. But now that we're talking about him at like the -105, -110 range as the slight favorite, I don't think it necessarily is. I feel like you're not going to get a whole lot of value because the quantity in terms of, you know, probability based off Swanson falling apart due to old age, it's very hard to quantify, almost impossible to quantify. So worth a stab at the plus money. So if you took that, then I think that's great. But yeah, now that we're into the minus odds, I'm not sure I would take it. But Swanson would be the pick for me overall, and I have bet him myself. But yeah, very happy to hear arguments on the contrary if either of you want to start hyping up Nate the Train. I'll let you guys take that one away.
Dom, you want to go first, or?
No, after you.
All right, fair enough. Well, so Will pretty much covered all that I really wanted to also say, so well done to him. But I also want to add that this is Cub's last fight ever, right? This is his like swan song for Swanson, right? It's like his I always get a little bit not panicky, but a bit concerned whenever a legend like Swanson retires or like has his retirement fight, because emotions might run rampant. Maybe because his family's in the crowd, he's like, fuck, I don't want to get knocked out by this guy, you know. So many like psychological things might happen in his mind that might make him freeze up. But at the end of the day, if Swanson ignores all that and becomes that consummate professional that we know that he is going to probably defeat Landwehr. I'm not going to say definitely, because I did pick Landwehr to win this fight via topology, but my ultimate is Swanson via KO round 2 or 3. So I do expect Landwehr to have the slightly higher chance to win this one, only because Swanson is a very hittable person. I mean, we know that he's been in wars and been in such high pace fights before. You know, Will mentioned the Do Her Choi fight, which is really a must watch. But being hittable is a bit of a danger sign whenever you face a guy like Landwehr. I feel like early on, Landwehr's got a brain the size of a gnat, you know, like the ton of little flies that you see, you know, like he is dumb as bricks, but he is made of bricks at the same time. Like, he hits hard. If he catches Swanson in the early rounds, like round 1 or maybe in round 2, when Swanson's still making his reads, I expect the fight to be over. I don't think Swanson's gonna survive the punches, really. But with that said, Swanson has been known to adapt and overcome. So Landwehr's only got such a small time frame to be successful, whereas Swanson has to just survive the storm. And yeah, I'm a bit conflicted, but I still circle back to that retirement talk, right? I still circle back to the psychological aspects of him retiring, like his family's in the crowd. The walkout might be a bit much, you know. I don't know how he's gonna fight. Like, that's pretty much my main focus here, the retirement jitters or whatever, right? So yeah, that's all I have to say. How about you, Dom?
Nate the Train, baby. Yeah, I think Nate's got this one. No, I'll give you more to it than just saying his name. I think that I completely see the logic. So first of all, what Will said was a great breakdown, and I do see the logic taking Swanson at the plus money. And yeah, I think it's just that retirement fight that's nagging at me, because I think Swanson's going to piece up Nate. To be honest, I think he's got the better strikes, in terms of boxing. At least he's got better accuracy, as you said. All the stats are there. He doesn't get hit as much. He's very elusive on the feet. I just think, like, my interpretation of the Quarantillo fight, the Billy Quarantillo fight, which is his last fight, and Nate's last fight, just something was nagging at me. So I watched both the fights, and what I noticed in the Quarantillo fight was, firstly, that guy has zero defense, so it wasn't hard for for Swanson to land on Billy. Not that Nate is much better, but if you watch Nate, he does keep his hands very high, which is one thing at least. He's got his hands high, even though he's walking straight forward at you. Billy basically has his hands down. I think he didn't respect Cub. If I watched that, I was thinking, this guy doesn't have any respect. He thinks he's going to run through Cub Swanson. And I think a lot of fighters who have been fighting Cub in his, quotation marks, old age, have just assumed that they're going to beat him easily, which is where he, exploits that gap, because he's been an underdog in most of those fights you mentioned, Will. He was an underdog against Billy. But something that I noticed there. So Billy absolutely started to cook in round 2. So Cub won round 1 unequivocally, sorry, and round 2 was all Billy. He won that round. 2 of the judges gave it to him, sorry, but I definitely gave it to him. He landed a lot more damage, and he started to do that weaponizing cardio thing. And after the end of the second round, on the live odds that flash up on the video, Cub Swanson was plus 250. So I do see that fight a bit differently, in the sense that Cub basically not needed to finish, but it was kind of against the perception of the bettors for that fight. So Cub plus 250 after round 2, because it looked like Billy was starting to cook him, basically. So landed some heavy shots on Cub. Cub didn't respond well. He sort of backed off a lot. He kept fighting. He stayed in it. He's a legend. He's one of the most fun fighters in the UFC. I don't question this, but I sort of think that in fight years, Cub is probably a similar age to Nate. As you mentioned, they fight differently. But if you look at the stats on screen here, he's had basically twice as many fights, and some of his fights are absolute wars. Had the fight with, who's the Jesus-looking dude, Carpenter. He had the fight with, he had a legendary fight with Clay Guida, right? And so many other fighters that have gone, into war territory. So he just recently, I think, more recently, as he's got older, he's realized, I need to manage, my damage that I take, and that's really, been a good thing, because he's had streaks in his career where he's gone on losing streaks. Incidentally, he has a win over Du Ho Choi. That was an epic fight. I'm just looking back through his record. Did he ever fight with Clay Guida? Did I make that up? Am I mixing him up with someone else? I'm trying to remember who his wars were with. He fought Darren Elkins. I don't know if he fought Clay. He didn't fight Clay Guida. He gave a different fighter. Apologies.
Are you thinking of Diego Sanchez?
It could be that one.
Everyone remembers.
That could be the one. Let me see, Sanchez. Yeah. Oh yeah. With Clay Guida. Yeah. Sorry, that was the fight I was thinking of. So yeah, he's had a lot of epic fights in his career. He's just managed himself a lot later. Nate is definitely, the wheel's definitely falling off Nate, because I think his last fight, which I bet on him there, I took the money line. He was plus 200. It was looking like a great bet, even though I think the judges' scorecards were kind of split. I think going into the third round, in which Sharia finished him, but he was definitely getting the better of the exchanges. He had Sharia on the back foot. I mean, we know what's going to happen here, and I just thought it's kind of ironic, given that you said I don't want to bet, I want to have anything to do with Jiri Prochazka fight, because Jiri's a madman, and like I think like Nate is a proxy for, he's like a mini Jiri basically. You just don't know what you're going to get. Like, he could follow a game plan, like, so we've seen some stuff out there about takedowns. So Cub Swanson loses every fight that he's ever been taken down in. Nate can definitely take him down, but he won't, right? So I don't know if Nate Landwehr is ever capable of following a game plan, just like I don't think Jiri is. I think like Jiri was told he has a game plan for the first Alex Pereira fight. He shot a takedown. I was like, what? Wow. And he had success taking Pereira down, and then he just went back. He just went back to default Jiri, just being very hittable, and you can't do that against Pereira. So yeah, I think this is highly volatile. Like I think I get the logic on Swanson, and I think early he's going to have success. And it's just that question of the durability of Nate, because it's starting to go, and he kind of relies on that strategically to sort of basically outlast opponents. He's been historically happy to take a lot of punches because he knows down the stretch he's going to cook you. Cub is of the age where he can be cooked, and he was being cooked in his last fight. If you rewatch it, Billy was definitely going to cook him, but Billy just couldn't take the damage. So I think people have just basically looked at those last two fights, and I think that explains a lot of the odds movement, because I do think Nate should be a slight favorite just because he's younger. He has a different style to Billy, so he's slightly tighter with the strikes. He's not as good a striker as Cub, but he's a better striker than Billy. He's probably not going to waste energy trying to take Cub down. So Billy did shoot a few takedowns at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's a volatile fight basically, and I do have a bet on this fight, but it's more of a sort of risk averse bet. I took the Landwehr decision no action because I think that if Cub's going to win, I think it's going to be a bit hairy for him, and I think it's just more likely to come on the scorecards. He's definitely going to win the minutes here. So I think Nate is he needs to finish if he doesn't hurt Cub badly, and I think if he hurts Cub badly, he'll probably just go all in, sell for the finish. But I think probably what's going to happen is Cub's going to knock him down twice. He's either going to finish him, or Nate's just going to come back and do the Jiri thing. He's going to do Jiri stuff. That's how I see it going. But I definitely respect the plus money on Swanson. Can see the logic there for sure. I don't know if Willie want to respond to any of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no. For the most part, I do hear you. I think that Landwehr definitely grows into fights, and I could see a situation where Swanson's cardio doesn't quite hold up as he is getting a bit older now, and Landwehr just starts marching him down, and the movement's not circling so well. I could definitely see that happening. But again, closely lined fight. I get what you're saying, that like Landwehr is a chaotic man, and I basically took my allocated time in the main event talking about how I don't like to bet on fights with chaotic men. But Swanson was the dog at the time that I bet it, and I think the price is definitely fair. And I would have been interested in Ulberg or Prochazka if I'd have seen them at plus 130 as well, maybe. Just as a final point, while you were talking, I was just scrolling through Swanson's record of the conversation about Clay Guida. Swanson has a win over Charles Oliveira, and then followed it up with a win over Dustin Poirier. I'm not trying to make a point with that. Obviously, it was 2012, I think, but like, how crazy is that to beat Oliveira and Poirier back to back? That's aged well. Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, well, you just remind me of something else. Like, he obviously announced his retirement after this fight, so we know he's retiring. So he's obviously chosen, I think he's chosen Nate Landwehr. So I think that's a good thing for your bet, right? Because he knows exactly what he's getting here. I guess the only thing I wonder about is, did he choose Nate because he thinks he can just piece him up, or did he choose him just because he knows it's fan friendly? At the end of the day, it's a swan song. You don't want it to be boring, right? He is going to engage. This is going to be a firefight. There's no way it's not. So I think that's why I think it's interesting for the volatility's sake. Like, if you knew like Cub was going to play it very safe, then yeah, I think it's excellent. And he may play it very safe, but I think if he's like down on the scorecards or whatever, I think tactics are going to go out the window, because it's the final hurrah, right? Why not just get in there, have fun? And I think he's a good pick. Don't get me wrong. I just think that, I think there's some volatility there for the unknown. Like, you picked him, but did you pick him just because you know that he's going to give you the war you want? Whereas I think a slightly cleaner fight is better for Cub, but he doesn't want that. He does, because he wants to go out with a bang. So yeah, let's if that's the case, if Cub goes out with a bang, I'll be happy for him. I'm sure everyone will. So let's hope for that. And then your bet will hit. Okay, and it's now we slightly mixed up the order here just so that we could all have a chance to speak in sequence. And this is actually the fight that happens higher up the card than the Nate Landwehr against Cub fight. We've got Curtis Blades against Josh Hokit in the heavyweight division, in what is a rather surprising and weird matchmaking move by the UFC, because you have hot prospect Josh Hokit, who's a Division I All-American wrestler, also was in the NFL apparently, bouncing around some teams in the NFL, and before he switched to MMA. and he's just run through all his opponents. Basically, in his whole career, he's only seen a second round once, I believe. I think it was, or twice. But basically everything else, 6 first-round finishes. I think the second round was the Dana White's Contender Series. The other one was his like professional debut. So like I've been through a lot of his fights, a lot of the footage. It's very impressive. He's comes out like a bull in a china shop. I'll just put the attributes on the screen here. So he's a very, very fast starter. He comes out, shoots takedowns, wings punches. He just likes to basically frighten his opponents, and they usually like a deer caught in the headlights. And he's just had great success with his pace. He's on the small side, so he, as you can see on screen, he weighed in at 200. So the upper limit is 265 for heavyweight, and he weighed in at 234 for his last fight. So his wrestling career in the US was all at middleweight. And if you look at some of the footage of him fighting at middleweight, he's ripped, he has abs, he looks really in shape. And not to like be body shame or anything, but you can obviously see it's that you can't quite see his abs here, but he has got abs still. I'll give him that. He's definitely put on weight, fat as well as muscle to fight at heavyweight, and he's obviously realizing a lot of success, a la sort of someone like, I don't know, Jailton Almeida, who was also in a lower weight class before coming out. But his wrestling pedigree was carved out at middleweight. That's just worth noting. And now he's fighting at heavyweight. He seems kind of brawly to me. No one's punished him for this, but he's winging punches. He's walking forward with complete disrespect for his opponents. And I think you can do that when you're facing the likes of Denzel Freeman, and people say, oh, but Denzel Freeman has a wrestling background. He does, but he also had basically no UFC experience. He had the same level of experience as Josh Hokit. And Hokit showed him no respect. And I just think that if that's going to be Hokit's approach to this fight, he is definitely going to be in for a nasty surprise, because Curtis Blades, is 14-5 in the UFC, and he has 13 knockouts in his career. And he knocked out Jailton Almeida, who tried to, obviously wrestle him, and he did have a lot of success taking him down in the first round. But then Curtis knocked out Jailton with some sharp elbows, and people are saying, "Oh, that's not important." I think that's highly relevant, actually, because that's exactly what Josh Hokit is going to do. He's going to shoot for the double many times in round one, potentially, unless he completely changes his tactics. From what we've seen, he's going to be aggressive in the first round. Outside of the first round, we don't really know how he's going to behave. We don't know, how his durability is. I haven't really seen him take a punch. I saw him take one hard punch in the Dana White's Contender Series. Didn't look like he liked it. He shot a takedown straight afterwards. So I don't think that guy hits as hard as Curtis Blades. Curtis Blades has a reach advantage of 6.5 inches. If I'm Curtis, I'm thinking just get straight on that jab straight away. For all we know, one power jab is going to drop Hokit, and you can finish him in round one. If not, you're going to have to weather the early storm and then really test out this prospect. And like I said, I think this is weird matchmaking from the UFC, because I obviously like Josh Hokit, because he's one of these guys who gets on the mic and he speaks like a WWE character. He's got the bandana and shows absolute disrespect for everyone, so he's kind of going for playing the heel. But he hasn't got anywhere near the level of experience of Curtis Blades. He's a much smaller man. As you can see, Curtis sort of fills out at heavyweight, 258 pounds. We're going to have the height advantage by 3 inches, the reach advantage. And I understand that the speed is going to be on the side of Josh Hokit, because he's going to be, he's smaller, so he's going to have to get on the inside and land those punches, and I guess just brawl with Curtis Blades. And I see a tumultuous first round potentially for Curtis Blades, but one in which Blades could potentially still stave off the takedowns, because I think that whilst Hokit is athletic, I don't think he's as athletic as Jailton Almeida, who was at light heavyweight before, not wrestling at middleweight or something. So I think Curtis Blades, if he's not going to get finished in round one, which I think is a possibility, because you have to say that because Josh Hokit's done it to all his opponents. So I think it's a slim chance, a really slim chance, like a 10% or below. Then I think Curtis Blades should win this fight more often than not. So I think there's a lot of value on the money line. The money line is not plus 170. I don't know why I wrote that. When I took Curtis, he was about minus 110. So apologies there. That's the correct line for this. I think he's still around that. Maybe it's like minus 120 now. And Curtis round 2 is at decimal 9 plus 800. I like that, just because I think Hokit's going to potentially exert himself or overexert himself in round 1. you know, at the end of his last fight with Denzel Freeman, and Denzel was having success getting up, by the way. So his wrestling background, just to put it there, it was a terrible performance by Freeman, but he was able to get back to his feet. He just took so much damage, on the mat that he wasn't really with it when he got up. But he did able to get back to his feet. But Hokit really looked like he was puffing and heaving for breath at the end of that one round. So I just don't think at heavyweight that kind of pace is sustainable. So for that reason, I'm backing Curtis with his experience to weather the storm. Put the jab, just put the jab on the 1-2. He's got nice straight punches. Put them on Hokit as early as possible. If you get taken down, get back up, keep going in round 2. Test this guy. Has he got a heart? Has he got durability? Does he have fight IQ? We don't know, but we're going to find out, I hope. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that that Hokit's going to be faster and snappier with the strikes, but the one thing that I always look back to when it comes to Curtis Blades in this particular instance when he fights Hokit is his fight against Almeida. Like when Almeida fought Blades, Almeida took him down 9 times in the first round. Now that might sound amazing, and it probably is, but the reality is that Blades got up, well, 10 times, I guess, with that maths correct. And in the second round, he pretty much outstruck Almeida, 16-1, right? It was crazy, right? So 16 strikes to 1 after the first round being him being taken down 9 times. I expect a similar kind of fight this weekend against Hokit, right? Hokit's going to be cocky. He's going to be confident. He's going to be looking to blast double legs and maybe, probably shout some racist stuff in Blade's ear quietly enough. I don't know. I don't like Hokit. But either way, I expect Hokit to win that first round if he doesn't finish him in the first round, right? But Blades he's a veteran. Like, he has the cardio to really push a stupid pace. I mean, remember that fight against Volkov all those years ago when he landed like 20-something takedowns and just pretty much ragdolled Volkov for those 25 minutes? Like, he can do some crazy shit. But again, Hokit, shorter fighter, more prone to throwing big bomb punches. He has the power, he has the speed, he can catch Blades off guard in the first round. So I kind of sprinkled an alt bet here for Hokit round 1 and 2 KO, I think. Only because the possibility is there. But I do think that Blades can win this one if the fight goes an extended distance, right? If it goes to round 3 or decision, he can win this one because he has the cardio, he has the experience, he has the tool set to make this one a troubling one for Hokit. And hopefully Blades wins, because I don't think I can stomach another Hokit post-fight interview. So yeah. Will, what do you got?
Yeah, I woke up this morning and the first thing I saw was that weird Hokit video of him doing a shitty WWE rip-off. I couldn't give a fuck, man. I don't like Hokit. I don't understand him at all. Like, I understand that he has a background in, like, D1 wrestling, blah, blah, but how many fighters have had a D1 wrestling background? Like, how often do you see the guys who have that, like, that tattoo that all wrestlers get when they hit D1 or whatever the heritage is there? Cody Durden's the first one who comes to mind. He might not have been D1, but, like, just really high-level wrestler doesn't mean you're going to be a champion, And aside from that, like, reputation preceding him of things that he has done before his MMA career, what has Hokit done to really deserve all of this hype and attention and the betting line for him to be a pick'em against Curtis Blades or close to a pick'em? I think it's just, it feels like the circus. It looks like the circus, so it's probably the circus. Yes, Hokit has looked pretty competent and, like, enthusiastic in his wins against, I don't even fucking know the names of the guys he beat, like, just fucking nobodies. And Curtis Blades is somebody who has had a very underwhelming few years, let's say, but like the guy's fighting top 10 talent. He's been competing against ranked opposition for like the last 7 years or something. It's crazy. Yeah, this one is just strange. I really don't know what to say other than like everything Dom has said. Basically, it's just one of those ones where I would love to see Hokit lose, and I really think the Hokit should lose this one. Unless there's just something that we're missing, and there might be, and a lot of people seem to see it, but I haven't really seen an argument that I've really thought that actually is pretty interesting and eye-opening from the Hokit side. Everything just seems to have all of this like pomp and hype. Oh, he's gonna do this. He's so sick. It's like, are we 12 years old watching Jeff Hardy in the WWE again? Not sure why Jeff Hardy was the first one I thought of, but it just feels very WWE. But anyway, something I did actually remember on this one. Last time I think I broke down a heavyweight fight. It was Kunaev versus Gelton Almeida. And the one thing I really got wrong there was the size difference. Everything I said about Almeida and the success that he would have, or he could have, blah, 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 completely ignored the fact that he was 20 pounds lighter. And it's a very, very unique conundrum you get in heavyweight. And it's something that I just didn't really consider, and it's something that Dom always has his eye on, and I think Dom's actually quite sharp at heavyweight betting for that reason, and it's the first thing I thought of here because I think I learnt my lesson the hard way there, and it's one that when you watch tape you immediately can sort of see that, you know, Josh Hokit is a little goblin for a heavyweight. He probably shouldn't be a heavyweight, and as you said, middleweight was the division in which he had all of his wrestling success. Curtis Blaydes is a pretty tall guy, 6'4". He is almost 265 on the limit. I think that all of the attributes that Hokit has in terms of, like, you know, him being imposing from like a sort of, you know, intensity perspective, the aggression, the pace in general, but also the, you know, all of the other question marks on the opposite side. But I just don't know if it's necessarily going to work against Curtis Blaydes, who's just like has all the things on screen there. He has size, he has experience, he has power, and he has composure. At close odds like this, I think that you absolutely should take Curtis Blaydes and just hope that there's nothing wrong with him. I mean, people have cited that he has injury concerns, I suppose, but, you know, it just doesn't seem right to me at all. Something stinks here. And I think that if Hokit was somebody who was meek, mild, and thanked nothing but God when he did his post-fight interviews, or if he was like Brazilian and didn't speak English without a translator, I just don't think that this was what the odds would look like here. Because, you know, take the hype of his wrestling background out of the equation, because let's be honest, he hasn't really used it that much. Like if I think of my memories of Hokit's fights in the UFC, it's mostly been him putting the pressure on guys against the cage and just like teeing off on them. But you take the WWE style stuff out of the equation and the hype of his background, isn't he just like, I can't even remember the bloke's name. Not Jared Vandera. Who's that fat guy who used to be a middleweight that blew up and took time off, that Tom Aspinall fought in his debut? That guy. Isn't that just who he is? Like, just a volume guy that occasionally hits hard. Like, I don't understand. I don't get the hype. I'm going to stop now before I just dig myself a hole and say shit that I can't take back because we're recording. But yeah, I hope Curtis Blaydes smashes this guy on to the next fight.
All right, here we go. Gamrot versus Ribovics has been a fight that kind of, it tickled my brain a bit. And I kind of want to highlight that I did pick Gamrot here mostly because of the experience and him being the best Polish wrestler to come from Poland or whatever, like that whole narrative. But I want to also talk about what he does poorly when it comes to his wrestling. And I mean, like, I am far from a fucking NCAA whatever the fuck wrestler, right? I've watched, tournaments and whatever. I've heard DC talk about wrestling whilst DC was also eating popcorn. I know enough about wrestling, well, mixed martial arts wrestling, to at least talk about it to some extent. Anyway, Gamrot is one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, bar none. There is no real comparison out there in this division that that he isn't. I mean, if you can go 3 rounds against Sarukian in that incredible fight that they had a few years ago, I mean, that's already a highlight reel for the ages. But if he can do that against Sarukian, I feel like he can do that against Ribovics. But that does come with a bit of concern, and well, a bit of concern is a wild, understatement. Gamrot is a desperate fighter when it comes to getting takedowns. He often does that weird pump fake jab and shoots for the double leg from 10 feet away. I don't know why he does that. I don't know if he's like nearsighted or if he has like no peripheral vision, but like he does it over and over again. No matter what fight he's in, he pumps that jab out and goes for the level change from across the fucking border, right? It's crazy. I feel like if he does that against Ribovics, and Ribovics already has a very low stance, he's just going to get punished. Like, we're going to see Ribovics post off that head and just punch Gamrot in the face. It's going to be that over and over again until maybe Gamrot gives up and says, all right, finish me, whatever, all that shit. I don't know. But I think in this fight, Gamrot has to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? He has to enter the fray. He has to at least eat some punches, much to the detriment to his already shit chin. And he has to wrestle from close, because if he wrestles from afar, Ribovics is going to post off his head and punch him in the face. That's the only reel I have when it comes to Ribovics and his takedown defense. Ribovics, I'm probably not saying his last name right. I apologize. I'm partially retarded. But I just think that he can defend the takedowns initially. Now, I say initially because Ribovics hasn't really fought anyone like Gamrot. Now, the one thing that sticks to my mind about Ribovics here, if I am saying his name wrong, I am going to sound like a retard after this. But I think that we're going to see him struggle with not the first takedown, not the second takedown, or the third, or the fourth, but on the 15th, on the 20th, right? We're going to see Gamrot's wrestling pressure take over those 15 minutes of fighting. But with that said, in any of those 15 minutes of fighting, Ribovics can find that knockout. Now, the only real kind of positive thing I can say about Gamrot, even though I did hop on about how bad he is, but the only positive thing I can say is that he's pretty much fought everyone in the UFC that's in the upper echelon, right? Like he is a ranked fighter in every sense of the word. He's fought pretty much all of the big names out there to some degrees of success, but still he has experienced those fights. I will not say the same about Ribovics here. I think that the level of competition that Ribovics has faced, like I think it was Felipe Bunes and some other people. Maybe I'm getting names mixed up here. I do that often, but whatever the case, Ribovics he hasn't really fought anyone special, and the ones that he did fight are just moderately okay. But he does have one attribute, or at least asset in his arsenal that's really, really important here, and that's going to be his offense, right? He marches down his opponents really well. He doesn't give a shit about eating strikes. He has a striker's chin. He can probably take a 2x4 to the chin and be like, yeah, okay, whatever. The point being is that if Ribovics does get the aggression going, if he does stay in the face of Gamrot, it is somewhat difficult for a wrestler to get a takedown off the back foot. I mean, we hear from Cormier, Cruz, probably Bisping, because Bisping apparently wrestles. But I think Ribovics, if he is on the front foot, he will be the most dominant fighter here. I mean, he has to dictate the pace to win. And with that said, I got him winning this fight by KO as a bet. And that further reinforces one of Will's bets here, because I kind of looked at that and I was like, yeah, I think Will's right there. I reckon he's gonna, get the win. So Ribovics KO, but I also think that Gamrot's gonna delay that KO by half the fight, right? So there's the placed bets there. That's whatever. I am picking Gamrot because I am a pussy. But other than that, this fight's gonna be either a Gamrot decision or Ribovics KO. Like that's the only read I have here. Does anyone have anything else to say or dispute or whatever? Or
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, it's a complicated one, this one. I've just convinced myself that Mateusz Gamrot has the worst style imaginable for MMA in 2026. Decent wrestling, I mean, I'd say good grappling, but like he's hardly like a lethal submission threat if his UFC fights are to be believed. And his top control's not that good. He doesn't hold fighters down for the majority of the time that he has on top, and that's why his takedown stats are so fudged, I suppose. Like there's way too many takedowns being landed per fight. Well, we got 6, 5, 11, 4, 4, 6, 4, 5. Like you shouldn't, if you're a very good top control grappler, and I guess just a very good grappler, because submissions aren't everything. Top control is probably more important. You shouldn't be landing 6 takedowns in a fight, because you probably should one and done it, or maybe a little bit closer to that, especially if you're pouring the pressure on. So yeah, I just worry that Gamrot, his style has aged like milk, because takedowns that do nothing and have nothing to them just don't score very well in MMA. And everyone's talking about damage these days. It's like anytime there's a fight, someone's like, yeah, well, they did nothing with the top control time. I hate it personally. I think like Joe Rogan has always been right in that regard, and he's just like, why don't you just get up? But that's just me. Ribovics is an interesting one, because that immediate conversation of how does he handle a wrestling threat, everyone is referring to the Loic Radzhabov fight where he was taken down 11 times. And it's funny, really, because I'm aware that there is such like confirmation bias in this conversation, because on the one hand, I'm criticizing Gamrot for landing 11 takedowns, but then I can also compliment Ribovics for being taken down 11 times, because it implies that he stood up 10 times, possibly. I mean, a round might have ended, but he stood up multiple times. He got back to his feet multiple times. Which, and watching it back, like if you watch the tape of Ribovics in grappling scrambles and transitions, actually quite a good grappler. Like I haven't really seen anything that made me go like, oh, he might be in trouble here. Like I'm sure Gamrot is very good at those scrambles and those moments, so I do expect Gamrot to get the better of him in those regards. But like Ribovics is not going to get outclassed on the mat, I don't think. I think he should be able to handle himself respectably well. And, so coming back to that conversation of Gamrot just being a crotch sniffer who has to fight perfectly to win rounds, because damage being the main thing, and Gamrot has very pillow-fisted offense on the feet. I think the door is open for Ribovics to have some very, to raise the question of who actually won the round, because Gamrot can win 4 minutes and 20 seconds and still lose a round. Ribovics just needs to land on him once or twice in a decent manner and then remain competitive when he's being grappled. Because I could see a fight where Gamrot wins most minutes and has 8 minutes of top control time, but does nothing with it. And Ribovics can make his shots count on the feet. People say that Ribovics isn't particularly dangerous. I mean, he has knocked down 3 of his 7 opponents in the UFC. I think that sounds relatively dangerous. One of them was a head kick to Terrence McKinney that knocked him out cold, so maybe not quite right. But yeah, I respect Ribovics' ability to get the fight back to where he wants it. And I think that this is not a 50-50 conundrum where if there's 7.5 minutes of Ribovics striking and then 7.5 minutes of Mateusz Gamrot grappling, that it'll be an even fight, because I think Ribovics can do so much more with the time that he has in his world than Gamrot can in the time he has in his world. So I think this one should be lined a lot closer than it is. I think Ribovics is currently like plus 150. I don't think that's right. I think people are looking at statistics more than like the tape here. And that's leading people to assume that Gamrot is just going to ragdoll him, which might be true, but ragdoll is a word that typically means like dominate, and Gamrot can ragdoll him, but not dominate him. And the ragdolling won't be for 15 straight minutes. It'll be for like 11, 12. And I genuinely think Ribovics can win the fight in those 3-4 minutes that anomaly takes place. So I'm hoping Ribovics makes it count. I'm hoping he doesn't shell up and not shell up, but I'm hoping he doesn't sort of dry up his offense because he's scared of the takedown, because you are going to get taken down. And I think the Radzhabov fight kind of showed that. But I think he had the right approach. He got back to his feet, and it was a competitive enough fight. And he looks to maybe have even improved it. I mean, against Elvis Brenner, who not someone whose wrestling I really respect, if we're being completely honest, he defended all of the takedowns. I think it might have been double digits or near to. And, you know, from the first one he shot, he looked really good for it. He used his strength. He got the underhook and just sort of managed to turn it into a sort of 50-50 scramble. Yeah, really was impressed with what I saw from Ribovics' grappling in transition and in scrambles. So I just think that there's a possibility that he can pull off the upset here. And I think people talking about how Gamrot's going to dominate, I just don't understand that at all. It feels to me like you've not seen Gamrot fight. You've just looked at the statistics. Maybe that's naive of me to say, but I don't know. I'm quite confident in my opinion that Ribovics should make this competitive. Also, sorry, I know I'm going on a lot here, but another point to kind of prove that the plus 3.5 spread market is obviously the first thing I impulsively thought to consider betting here on the Ribovics side, because I do think he'll be competitive and I do think he'll win a round, maybe more, or finish him. But the money line on that is like minus 250 or something along those lines. So the bookies really believe that Esteban Ribovics is going to win a round. How can you be plus 150 on the money line but be very much expected to win a round? I personally don't think that makes mathematical sense. So I think it's almost objectively true that Ribovics should be less of an underdog than he is. Anyway, move on to Dom. I said too much there. Dom, take us away.
No, it was all good stuff. And I just, some additional stuff here, right, is that, Gamrot hasn't had a finish since 2021. So, he's had a subsequent 10 fights in the UFC, none of which he's managed to get a finish. Sorry, he did finish Diego Ferreira, sorry. But that was more of seemed like a rib injury after a knee. It was a bit of a strange one. So that was in 2021, sorry, as well. So I didn't speak out of turn, but he had a subsequent 8 fights that haven't had a finish in, unless it's been him. There was an injury, sorry, Fiziev. So 7 out of 8, and the Fiziev, that was the injury. That was a strange one where I don't think under normal circumstances you could really say that was something to do with Gamrot's finishing ability. So that speaks to the plus 3.5. I think Ribovics extremely live here. And I agree with the point you made about the Loic Radzhabov, which was actually a short notice replacement. Ribovics was supposed to fight Canwella Kirk at UFC 285, and Loic came in and comes in remarkable shape. That guy always looked in remarkable shape, past all of his CSOD and USADA testing, so I don't want to speculate on anything, but he's relentless takedowns. As you mentioned, Ribovics was expecting to fight more of a striker in Kirk, but still managed to get up. And I think I've seen some people say, the problem is Ribovics is not like a powerful striker. And I'm like, yeah, that's good, because like people are looking at the Klein fight and they're going, well, that's how this is going to play out. Well, people are forgetting Klein had 88% takedown defense. It didn't matter, because if you can't scramble, you can't scramble, right? And he hadn't fought anyone like Gamrot who's going to just chain the takedown. So Gamrot is going to absolutely come here to chain takedowns. As you mentioned, he's going to get takedowns. So Ribovics doesn't have the highest takedown defense stat. Well, actually, sorry, he does. It's 70%, but it doesn't matter because he's going to get taken down, because that is what Gamrot does. But he doesn't do anything with it. As you mentioned, the point about his style not being good for MMA, I think you've nailed it there, because you look at his significant strike count. He's never getting more than 60 strikes in a fight, because all he's doing is taking people down. Ribovics literally lands twice as many strikes in his last 3 fights. He's doubling up what Gamrot is getting. So on damage criteria, you can feel like this should be a close fight, because it's going to be the control versus the damage. And I think in that situation, you want to take the sort of younger, more dynamic fighter. Gamrot has looked really off in his recent fights. He's looked like he hasn't been able to get as many takedowns, and he's looked vulnerable on the feet. This is definitely a great opportunity. Like Ribovics is catching Gamrot a great time in his career. Gamrot's not super old. I think he's like 35, but he's getting to that point now where he's not going to have a great round 3 after grappling for 2 rounds. You know, he may have been able to go 3 rounds hard, but Ribovics is dangerous throughout the fight. He throws with nasty intent. He just non-stop volume. Like all his fights, he's just putting out the volume. He's, you know, yes, he's not knocking people out with one punch, but he's putting on serious damage on his opponents. All his opponents come out looking weathered. So yeah, I think it's a great bet at plus 150 to take the Ribovics money line. I personally am not sure if he'll get the finish, because even if you hurt Gamrot, Gamrot often gets hurt. He usually like grabs the leg and we go straight back to the grappling. So we're probably going to have to rely on the judges to understand the damage criteria and the scoring. And I think it's a close decision, but one which Ribovics can definitely steal 2 rounds just because he's the one that's landing the shots and Gamrot isn't. So yeah, I also, you know, think that Will is, yeah, I'd side with Will. I think picking Gamrot is fine, but it's going to be one of those ones where you're sort of on the edge of your seat because he's going to be getting lit up here. I mean, you know, he could even, you know, he could get lit up from the opening bell. But I think if there's going to be a finish on the Ribovics side, you may as well play a late finish like round 3 because he seems to maintain his aggression and output even into the 3rd round. So round 2 or 3 if you're going to take a finish. But personally, I see it as a close decision. And let's move on. We've got one more fight to go.
You knew it was coming. It's me talking about women's MMA. I will say, though, before we start off, that last week I fumbled it. I got it wrong. Tabitha Ricci did not perform as I expected her to. A lot of the things I was complimenting and saying that she should bring to the table against Jandiroba, she did not bring them to the table. I think for some, also like credit to Jandiroba where it's due, her striking did look pretty effective, didn't it? I mean, she was still winging shots in those early couple of rounds, but she was landing and she was tagging Ricci, and Ricci didn't like it. And as soon as Ricci's perceived striking advantage went out the window, or at least it seemed like it was going to be tougher for her to win those minutes, the fight was over. She'd lost. The reason I bring that up in so much detail is because I think it's mad that I wrote my breakdown for this fight before Ricci versus Jandiroba took place, and all of the things I've highlighted for this fight took place in that fight. So it's really weird. It feels like I've predicted the wrong fight, if that makes sense. Also, Loopy, Godinez and Tabitha Ricci are similar-ish kind of fighters, and I've gotten very confused juggling those breakdowns back to back around the same time. So I might say something wrong here. Anyway, Tatiana Suarez, right? The prodigal daughter of women's MMA for years has been like talked about as that woman that's just come in for the belt and will get there eventually. Until a bunch of injuries and time off completely ruined her career. People will probably think this is just me blowing the trumpet of women's MMA, but I do think that Tatiana Suarez is one of the biggest what-if stories in like the UFC. If she was a man, people would be like mourning the loss of her potential. She should have been champion, and if she hadn't had injuries, I think she would have. I think she would have looked so much better in that Weili Zhang fight. I think she just ran out of steam before she got there. And I think the public knew it as well. I think Tatiana Suarez ended up like a favorite in that fight, didn't she? Pre-fight. Obviously, she looked terrible, but like it kind of demonstrated what it has demonstrated in her later fight against, I think it was Amanda Lemos she fought next. She doesn't have the explosiveness on her takedowns anymore, so they're no longer a given. It's no longer a given that she's going to be able to ground fighters at will. And also it seems to have played havoc with her cardio in that she's now not given to be able to produce takedowns in round 3 when she's a little bit tired. It also isn't a given that she can fight for 15 minutes competently, because obviously the wheels fell off against Weili Zhang, but also against Lemos in that round 3, she was running away, not looking to sort of engage in grappling as a safety mechanism, just so she wasn't getting hit. Exactly like what happened in round 3 of Virna Jandiroba versus Tabitha Ricci. So, Loopy Godinez is a fighter who has had a bit of time on bottom, a bit more than Ricci had, but she's looked competent from a defensive perspective, but I wouldn't say she's looked elite. Her takedown defense statistics sits at, I think, around like the 80% mark. But if I'm honest, I think it's a little bit skewed. I think there must have been a fight along her career where she was, spammed with them and managed to defend them pretty well. But we know Loopy is somebody who typically actually is the one offensively grappling herself. She's a wrestler, really, primarily at heart. So something to note here is that really we're actually expecting Godinez to rely on her plan B, because whilst this is actually a fight between two primarily wrestler-grappler types, it still feels like a styles match because Loopy needs to keep it on the feet to win, I think. I don't see her taking Suarez down consistently, and I don't see her maintaining top position if she does. So, yeah, that's immediately a bit of a question mark for me. I don't really like it when a fighter has to rely on what isn't their best work. And, let's be honest, what has Loopy Godinez ever done with her striking that's actually impressive? Not that she's terrible. She's just sort of enthusiastic volume that doesn't really amount to much. Doesn't seem like it's particularly high level in any regard at all. Another point to make here that is different from the fight I keep comparing it to is this is in the bigger cage, which if it is striker versus grappler, that does favor Godinez. But my big issue with this one, which is kind of the main point I wanted to make, is that Loopy Godinez's footwork is not there, in my opinion. She herself fought Verna Jandiroba, and it was very prominent there that she just didn't circle enough. And basically, Jandiroba was able to cut the cage off without having to try and cut the cage. She just walked forward, and Godinez wanted to sort of fight around that sort of the black outline of the octagon inside the cage. So she wanted to sort of skirt with her back to the fence, which against someone like Jandiroba, fucking terrible idea, because Jandiroba likes to use the cage to sort of set her takedowns up, and Tatiana Suarez does too, to a certain extent. So if Loopy Godinez isn't on her bike, as they say, and she's much more sort of like sitting up against the fence, hoping to use that as a form of takedown defense, I think she's fucked in those first two rounds. I think that she needs to do exactly what I thought Tabitha Ricci was going to do last weekend, and use her volume and use her evasiveness and circle to keep Tatiana Suarez zombie walking forward and not actually being able to engage the clinch or engage the takedown attempt. But I don't think Loopy Godinez has shown on tape that she has that ability. Tabitha Ricci had shown that ability, but she just didn't fucking do it. Anyway, so yeah, I fear that Tatiana Suarez is going to get her hands on Loopy in rounds 1 and 2. And I think that if she does, whilst we haven't seen Godinez get outclassed by anyone in the grappling world, she will get taken down and she will get held down, I think, is fair to say. It's what Jandiroba was able to do to her. Mackenzie Dern had a little bit of top control time against her as well, I think. Let me just confirm that that's actually true. Okay, no, she had 2 minutes 45. That's not that much. She still outstruck her, though. Interesting that I'm sort of talking about control time, even if I don't expect Tatiana Suarez to do anything with it. That completely contradicts the rant I just went on for Gamrot versus Ribovics. But the difference is women's MMA, the conversation about power and control time is still king in women's MMA, because power and fight ending intent doesn't really come into it. Like Loopy Godinez could outland Suarez 2-1 and strikes, but if Suarez still has 3-4 minutes of control time, I think Suarez still wins the round, because nothing Godinez does on the feet is eye-catching enough for the judges to go, oh wow, that's damage and fight-ending intent. It's just pitter-patter jabs. The only way that will show itself will be in round 3, which is the next key point to talk about, and that is I do expect Suarez to fall apart here. I do expect Suarez to fade. I do expect her takedowns to dry up, and I think Loopy will march forward and will tag her. There'll be a lot of clinching, disengaging, significant strikes, blah, blah, blah. Very similar to the round 3 we got of Verna Jandiroba versus Tabitha Ricci. The issue we had there, which is another key point that goes back to what I was just saying, no power on the side of Tabitha Ricci. She was 2 rounds down. She knew she was 2 rounds down, but all she could do was win at 10-9. Because no finishing intent, no finishing ability, and enough savvy on the regards of the grappler to be able to clinch up and just sort of stay safe. I think Tatiana Suarez could do exactly what Verna Jandiroba did in that round and just do the bare minimum. She'll lose the round. It's fine. It is whatever. You still win a 29-28. So in short, I basically see a repeat of the fight we saw last week. I think it's the same thing. I think that Loopy Godinez has shown that she is capable of laying the egg that Tabitha Ricci sort of laid last week. And I think Tatiana Suarez is also capable of doing all the things Virna Jandiroba did last week. So from a betting angle for myself, I played Tatiana Suarez to win and round 2 to start at -110. I was semi-interested in betting Suarez, but I think that there wasn't enough value there. So personally, I think putting the round 2 starts on the end of it does provide a little bit more value. I do not see Godinez getting outclassed on the mat. Therefore, I don't see her getting finished outside of something very high variance. But as I also said, I do really see Godinez winning round 3 quite easily because I think Suarez will fall apart. She's done it in her last 2 fights, and she's proven that if she has to work hard, which Godinez will make her work hard, she'll struggle and she'll pay the price. I don't think she gets finished. I don't think she gets 10-8'd. So I see Tatiana Suarez 29-28, which means that the Godinez plus 3.5 handicap is in play. Haven't seen the odds on that one, though. I doubt it'll be worthwhile given that this is relatively closely lined. But, you know, it's another angle as well if you don't fancy playing Suarez because she is damaged goods at this stage. I guess we'll go over to you, Dom. I think you have some opinions on this one yourself. So you'll probably give me the Godinez side, but let's see what you think.
Yeah. I'm glad you pointed out the irony, given and you addressed it already, given the Gamrot fight and the sort of somewhat similarities here in the line as well, right? With the pricing of Godinez. Godinez is priced very similarly to Ribovics. You know, completely agree about the power on display will be more obviously in the men's division, featherweight division, but I think, you know, I don't want to like do Loopy striking down too badly. Whilst I agree that she's definitely not a knockout threat. Although she has got a knockout of no, she doesn't have any knockouts, does she? Let's have a look. No, she has no knockouts. So yeah, she's not a knockout threat. I wanted to say she looked good in her last couple of fights where she has had to strike, right? So she only got 1 takedown against Andrade and she outstruck her, throwing 100 significant strikes, and she went strike for strike with Julia Pilastri, who I think we all rate on the podcast. I think we all like Julia Pilastri. She's a fighter to watch for the future. Julia Psycho Pilastri, who just throws with nasty intent. Got a KO of Karolina Kowalkiewicz in her last fight, which I think all of us predicted, and we're very happy. Late finish, I would say, round 3. I'm going on a tangent just to say that I think Loopy can compete with strikers on the feet, and Suarez isn't a striker, so that I think your breakdown, actually I agree with it. So I agree that Tatiana Suarez is very live to get a couple of rounds through just grappling, but at the line, and you know, that's really why I'm taking Loopy, is just because she's plus 160. I think like for Loopy to win one of the first 2 rounds is not completely out of the question. It's not like, you know, she comes from a wrestling background herself. Her sister is on the Canadian wrestling team or something, so she's obviously been doing it for a long time, and I think her body type is very tanky. I do think the Jandiroba fight is a red flag. I'm not sure the Mackenzie Dern one is so much because there wasn't so much control time there, but yeah, of course we know Virna she's a great wrestler, you know, and I was also on the Richie side last week, and you know, I think it was good of you to address it here, but I think it was one of those things that was always nagging me the whole week. I was like, yeah, but is Gillian Robertson a proxy for Virna? And the answer is no. Obviously, we know that now. Virna can do Virna things, and I think Suarez is as good, if not better, than Virna on paper. And I think it's just her recent, fight with Lemos, as you mentioned. I watched the fight again, and she kind of struggled to get the first takedown. Came easier in the second round, weirdly. But yeah, she did. I think maybe it's always that first round, right? I think that first round, I think that is the one that Loopy's more live to win if she can just keep it standing. I think, you know, these rounds are going to be close, and I'm not sure it's clear cut that Loopy wins round 3, to be honest. I think Suarez will keep trying for the takedowns, you know, and she may get them in round 3, and Loopy has poor fight IQ. So I just think it's a close fight. And, if Suarez of old turns up, you know, the one who was running through the division, then I think that then that bet will look good. But I think at the current line at plus 160, I just feel there's value on the Loopy side. Obviously very concerned about her getting taken down, but I'm hoping that due to her body type and her scrambling ability, that she'll be able to, you know, work back to the feet. And as we mentioned, like, she doesn't need to land a lot to nick around here. You look at Suarez on the flip side in terms of her volume. I mean, she's landing like no strikes in any fight. So that supports your point, I guess. Like 20 strikes in the Lemos fight. 23 strikes in the Jessica Andrade fight. But it supports your point that I actually finished that one, that the judges don't care about the striking so much. The control time looks good. I think the other point is that she's also smothering her opponents such that they can't throw, whereas I think Gamrot will give openings to Ribovics to throw even from the bottom. And we know that, you know, with Dern winning over Jandiroba, despite the fact that she was being controlled for most of that fight, actually, she was throwing from the bottom and the judges scored it. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, you know, if Loopy can separate or if she can throw strikes from bottom, you know, who knows. So I just think it's a close fight. And at plus 160, I don't know if it's wider than that now. I haven't looked at the line. I think there's some value there. I think it might be wider than plus 160. Oh no, sorry, it's shortened now. Wow, it's plus 130 now. I'm not sure the plus 130 holds a lot of value, but if you believe that Suarez and her injuries are catching up to her and that she can't do the relentless grind on Loopy, then maybe there's still value there. I'm curious to hear what Josh thinks.
Yeah, I've been on the Godinez side for all week now. I do not at all trust Suarez to pull anything off here. She is a relic of the olden times of being a one-sided fighter. Being a specialist in 2026 is like no longer a big deal anymore. She has near zero chance to really wrestle effectively against Godinez, and I stand firm by that. I want to highlight a few things that Godinez does well defensively, or at least not defensively, but by default. Her stance, first of all, is very counter wrestling already. She has a very low stance. She has a wide bladed stance, I suppose you could say. It's like a modified bladed square hybrid. And she also has a similar stance to Jessica Andrade. Now, I bring that up because Suarez fought Andrade a while ago, and there is going to be some familiar pattern to the way that Suarez takes, or at least attempts to take, Godinez down this weekend. So when Suarez was wrestling against or fighting against Andrade, the one tool that she used was a single leg. Now, as I said before, Godinez and Andrade has a similar stance, right? They have a raised shell, and their lead leg is very out there. It's pretty much a lure to Suarez. Like, she wants that lead leg badly. I believe that Godinez and her lead leg is going to be attacked by Suarez, but the thing here is that being shorter, Godinez being shorter by 3 inches and her stance being so low, Suarez is going to have to so much before you fall down. And my whole thing here is that Suarez is not going to want to level change so much that she face punches to the floor whilst getting level change, because Godinez has the counter wrestling to kind of, you know, avoid that kind of takedown, right? I don't know how Jandiroba took Godinez down. I skipped that tape. I apologize. But I do think that Suarez is a one-dimensional wrestler in that she does attack the legs often. In that regard, though, I also think that Godinez, being the shorter fighter, allows her to have more freedom striking, I guess. Like, she has fantastic boxing. Like, I mean, I know that you guys said that, you know, her punching power is pillow-fisted and whatever. Like, she doesn't hit hard, she doesn't get knockouts. Her accuracy is all the same. She strikes at a high volume. She is a bit of a headhunter, but that's not going to matter too much here, because if Suarez wants to wrestle, she has to lower her base too. So there's no real chance of Godinez aiming too high and overreaching, therefore exposing her abdomen or legs to a takedown. Godinez is going to punch straight and keep that base low. So I do think that ultimately Godinez and her stance is a perfect barrier to stop Suarez from getting those takedowns. Now, on the flip side, I do want to talk about Godinez and her takedown ability. I think she's going to get maybe 1 or 2 takedowns against Suarez here. And that I'm only saying that because, firstly, Godinez is, as Dom said, you know, she has like a wrestling background. And also she's shorter, and no one has really tested Suarez's takedown defense before. She has had 4 or 5 takedown attempted on her throughout her whole UFC career. So I don't think that it's out of the question that Godinez is going to want to mix it up a bit. And furthermore, to also rant on about Godinez even more here, body strikes. I do think that Godinez can attack the body of Suarez given the height disadvantage and all that stuff, you know. And Will did mention that Suarez slows down in the third round, which is true. So if Godinez attacks the body early on and, you know, kind of stems that aggression that Suarez needs to get those takedowns, I do think that that fatigue that we typically see in round 3 from Suarez is going to happen in round 2 instead. So yeah, I have been on Godinez all week. I have been sending out propaganda and all that shit to everyone I know about it. So I don't want to say I oppose Will and his Suarez win and round 2 starts thing. That's a fair thing to see. But I've been adamant about Godinez all week, so that's my side and all that stuff. So yeah.
Well, I wasn't expecting that. Usually, yeah, that's great analysis and better than mine on Loopy and her defensive grappling. So, should we take a quick look at our bets for this week? I know it's quite a long episode at the moment, but we do have a quite extensive slate here. Go to Will first. Anything you want to pull out that you haven't spoken about so far?
Just the Padilla decision, no action bet at the bottom. Everything else is one of the fights we've looked at. Yeah, Chris Padilla is a confusing guy. He's decent from a minute winning perspective, and I think he wins this fight relatively comfortably. But I think that he's also got a low-key amount of chaos to him, and he is capable of scoring finishes. Whereas Markel Medeiros is a kind of silky, flashy striker. Very sort of kick heavy, low kick heavy, pretty much. So aside from like a leg kick offense, I don't really see a whole lot of danger and damage from his perspective, which makes me think that the Padilla finishing equity is much higher than the Medeiros one. Therefore, if anyone's finding a finish, I think it'll be Padilla. So I was quite happy to play that for 2 units, given that Medeiros' grapplings also looks a bit sketchy at times. And Padilla does look like a low-key, very good grappler. Yeah, so hoping he can pull off a finish. But obviously, if it goes to the distance, I get my money back. So feels like a low-risk, medium reward kind of spot. So, but yeah, that's the only unique bet I have that I haven't already discussed. So over to you, Dom.
Yeah, I see that's also gone a bit wider as well since you've taken it. I didn't look into that fight too much. I just know Medeiros has mainly had decisions in the UFC, so it seems solid. What have I got here? I got Randy Brown, which I think I've spoken about all the other ones, but Randy Brown concerns me. He's no longer the favorite here. He's actually, I believe, switched and now he's the underdog. So yeah, that was a bad shout taking him at -120. I'll stand by that though. I think Randy's all round put together better than Holland, and but it's a close fight, and it won't surprise me if Holland tests out his dusty chin. So it's high to low on the money line. So highest confidence being Blades with lowest Brown. After Josh's diatribe, I probably flipped Godinez above Costa maybe. I've on the right. These are kind of like insurance. A lot of insurance plays in the props, like the decision no actions protect you from the decision outcome. So I like Ribovics' finishing upside against Gamrot. I like Prado's finishing upside against Radke. I like Landwehr's finishing upside against Cub. I've got Costa to win 1 round in what I hope is a close affair. And then I didn't play these split decision props for much because they're long odds. But I always feel like if you've picked the right side and then you lose on a split decision, it's the most painful thing. So at least I'm going to get my stake back, kind of thing. So yeah, I think Godinez Suarez is very live for a split. I don't really see a finish there. Interestingly, the Godinez decision no action is priced higher than her money line. So the bookies think Suarez is more live for a finish, but I think that could be a little bit off. So I actually play Godinez decision no action, just small. It's like plus 250. I know that we just talked about her lack of boxing finishes. But as Josh alluded to, you know, stranger things have happened, and Loopy has subs on her records. So if we're in for 3 rounds of grappling, anything's possible. Ribovics and Gamrot split. Just think it's a close fight. And I've spoken about Murzakanov Costa split. And the Jiri Prochazka round 3, 4, 5 is like super popular. Josh had that. Yeah, hand over to Josh.
Yeah, there's not much different on my end than usual. I got a parlay. I'm not going to really talk about it because if you read it, it makes sense to pretty much anyone, I reckon. But the alt bets are pretty extended here because I do think that this whole card is just, I mean, excuse the French, but fucked. I am going to have a very low prediction rate. I think I predicted my prediction rate to be at least 4 correct by the end of this weekend. So I'm going to be limping this next weekend, this next week. So but yeah, I did the math on like if all of those alt bets win, I'll be up like 20 units. So I'll be happy. But I don't think all of them will land. Maybe 1 or 2. Even so, I'll still be up. So yeah. That's my pretty basic and very long slate there.
Yeah, and with that, there's nothing left to do. Just to tell everyone, hope you have a great time on Saturday watching this card, and the 3 of us will be back with breakdowns for the next card very shortly. Thanks for tuning in.